reason, I recorded a second hour and not downloading. So Emma's joined us live, and hopefully I'll be able to record this, download it for everybody else. Okay. Talk about tests. Okay. That's what we're going to do today. And then since we'll have time, I'm going to talk about the semester book review. Okay. Just kind of bring you up to date on kind of what to look for there. Okay. So to start with, on Tuesday for you guys, right? We'll be back here Tuesday. You're going to have an objective portion of the test. Okay. There's going to be 20 matching. Okay. So these are a lot of the terms that you'll find in the matching. Okay. I don't know if there's 20 there. Make sure you study the notes. Okay. This is helpful because this is a lot of the terms we used in the notes. Okay. But you need to study the notes. Don't just study this. Okay. Okay. Study the notes. There's 2 listing questions, which you might be able to figure out. And then a medium answer question, which should be 2 paragraphs. Okay. So comparing, contrasting the social contract theories of Hobbes and Locke. Okay. So that'll be day 1 on Tuesday for you guys. Okay. For those of you at home, that'll be Monday. Everybody get that? Okay. That's pretty much format. Know those notes really well. The definitions in the matching will be very similar to what I gave you in the notes. Okay. You should be able to recognize those terms. All right. And then we'll talk about the essay. Okay. This is the possible essay question. It is the essay question. Okay. So when you write an essay, do you need an introduction? Yes. Okay. Usually want to have something called a thesis statement, something like that. Okay. Now, you're going to be a little bit pressed for time. So just like Jade showed up a few minutes early for class today. Okay. If you guys want to come in early on Tuesday to school, okay, you might have to enter through the front door. I don't know they keep that locked over there. Yes. You might have to walk around the front door. Okay. If you want to come in a few minutes early, like 10 minutes early, you can. I'll be in here. Okay. And I will have this question up on the board. You bring in blank sheets of paper, you can start writing. Okay. That way you're not pressed for time. Okay. So your introduction. Okay. Then you're going to have body paragraphs. The English founding documents. Okay. Well, we know there's 3 of those, right? The Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, and the English Bill of Rights. Okay. Now, the influences of the English on us are extensive, like the language we use, the forms of government when we talk about the layers of government, national, state, local governments, some of the terminology. And then in the Magna Carta, we find limited government. And with the Petition of Right and the English Bill of Rights, we find representative government, power moving from the king to parliament. Okay, that's something we took and used. Okay. Now, some of the rights that are found in these, like I said the other day, you don't have to go out and list all these rights. Okay. Should you mention some of them? Yeah, you should. Due process, trial by jury. If you want to talk about quartering of soldiers, that would be one that you could transition into the next. Okay. So the Colonial and Revolutionary, you can do these in separate paragraphs, or you can build that paragraph together. The Colonial, you go back to, obviously 1607, Jamestown, moving through 1760, that era of salutary neglect. Okay. 3 types of colonies: royal, proprietary, and independent. All 3 of those generally had 3 branches of government, And the legislative body was in part run by white male property owners, yes? That controlled the purse. It controlled the money, okay? That's big, right? That's something we do today. So if we want to do another stimulus package, relief package for COVID, Nancy Pelosi, who is the head of the Speaker of the House, she has to do that. The House of Representatives have to do it. If they're going to spend the money, it's got to start in the House. That's your tradition we take back to the colonial era, okay? So during the colonial era, you get those different forms of government, self-rule, especially with the independent colonies, okay? And then you move into the revolutionary experiences, which really the era of salutary neglect ends with the 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War. And coming out of that, the debt that Britain has, they ask for taxes. I mentioned the Stamp Act, the response to that, the Declaration of Rights and Grievances by John Adams, right? The Stamp Act Congress, and then they repeal that, but add other taxes. The colonial reaction to that, things really heat up in 1770 with the Boston Massacre, right? And the propaganda of Paul Revere that starts to build resentment against the British. And then you get into the Boston Tea Party, the Sons of Liberty. So right now I'm mentioning some names, John Hancock, Sam Adams, with the revolutionary experiences. So if you talk about those men in this, you don't really need to mention them, okay? If you want to save those names, Hancock, Sam Adams, Sons of Liberty, to the last one, I think you'd want to include those names here, okay? So that goes from the Boston Tea Party to the Intolerable Acts, right? The Coercive Acts, to the battles of Lexington and Concord, the First and Second Continental Congresses. And the Second Continental Congress is your segue kind of into the last paragraph, which will be moving us towards the Declaration of Independence, okay? So when you're talking about the Founding Fathers, including famous speeches and documents, obviously one of those documents is going to be the Declaration, okay? So in your book, if you move to page 22, and guys, I did have victory on getting the video to you guys, okay? It's on the module, and it's just, I didn't change the name of the file. It's called Video 9. Because last night when I was working on this, I thought I had it. And then I changed the name of the video, and it disappeared. So I'm like, I'm not changing anything, okay? The video quality does improve as we go through. At the beginning, it's kind of fuzzy, and you probably have to turn up your volume pretty loud, okay? But it's helpful, okay, for this revolutionary era especially, and the Founding Fathers, okay, that we talk about, all right? Video is very good for that. Good recap, okay? Plus you learn some new stuff that I didn't talk about. Okay, so there is a recap of that on page 21 and 22. And then you have this stuff on Paul Revere. Now, Paul Revere is somebody you want to mention, especially when it comes to the lithograph of the Boston Massacre and the propaganda. But you don't have to get into all this stuff about the Midnight Rider, but it is pretty interesting. Tennyson's poem about that kind of became a legend or a myth and so forth. So you can find out the truth behind that by reading this, okay? Now, Patrick Henry, and I think I mentioned this in my lecture yesterday, at the Virginia Convention. Remember, they needed to get 13 of 13 colonies. All 13 had to agree to independence. And so if you can get Virginia, which is the most populated and the most influential state, them in New York, I mean, those are kind of the two most influential states. If you can get Virginia to come along, then you can maybe get North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia to come on, okay? And so this speech, Give Me Liberty, Give Me Death speech, is going to cause the Virginia Convention to send word to the delegates in Philadelphia from Virginia to vote yes for independence. Okay? So, Patrick Henry, somebody you want to talk about. Okay? And then common sense on the next page. Okay? Thomas Paine. As that little blurb at the top will explain to you guys, this common sense pamphlet sold 150,000 copies in the New World. That's the #1 best-selling publication besides the Bible in the 1770s. Okay? Now, Thomas Paine loved to take credit for instituting the American Revolution and independence. Okay? He tried to take too much credit, and it's going to end up costing him a lot of friends. Okay, in the end, he's going to die a lonely man. Okay, I mean, he's actually going to go over to the French Revolution. Okay, and help stir up problems over there after the American Revolution, and they're going to kick him out. Okay, so anyhow, Thomas Paine, common sense. Now on the second page. The crisis, that actually takes place after the American Revolution, or excuse me, after the Declaration, so you don't really need to include the crisis. I put it in there because look at the date. It's December 19th, 1776. This is 6 days. This is read to Washington's army at Valley Forge, while they're freezing their butts off. Just 6 days before they cross the Delaware and attack the Hessians in Trenton, New Jersey, and will be the first victory for the Continental Army. One of very few victories during the war. This is inspiration. Okay, it's eloquently written, and you should read it. Okay, the Declaration itself, and then. There are some deleted clauses that I include on page 32. You don't really have to mention that, or Jefferson's thoughts on slavery. Okay, I just included that for your general knowledge, and that's it. So, founding fathers that you might want to include. I mean, I haven't really talked about George Washington. You might throw him in there. Jefferson, of course, with writing the Declaration. John Adams should be included earlier, Hancock, Ben Franklin, that Albany Plan of Union in 1754, kind of a rough draft for the Articles of Confederation. Okay. Paul Revere. Okay. So you should be mentioning probably at least 6 people. You can probably include more than that if you want. But there's certain people I'm going to be looking for when I grade this. Okay. Now, if you're pressed for time on the conclusion, you know, I get it. You know, just give me a sentence or two. If if you're pressed for time, that's okay. I won't hammer anybody because of the conclusion, but try and at least give me a sentence on that if you're really rushed at the end. Okay. Just to make it it makes it an essay. Okay. So. Those will obviously take me a little while to grade. Okay. But yeah, just go through those notes, okay, that we have, and watch the video. It should be helpful, and you should be in good shape. I mean, is it hard? Well, if you know all the material, it's not hard, right? It's just a lot of material to memorize, okay? Which is good exercise for you, for your brain. Okay? You guys know I've been pretty easy on you. First 4 weeks, 5 weeks of school, okay? So this is the time where you say, okay, I got to dedicate some time to Mr. Ebright's class. Okay? All right, so do that. All right, so let's talk about the book review. Do you have any questions on the test? Book review for you guys will be due November 24th. Okay, I put that on the canvas. All right. And what are we doing? What are we doing? Okay, so we are going to find a book that is from the political left or right. You guys know what that means. Okay, now some of you in this classroom were conservative. Some of you were moderate. I don't know if we had any liberals in here or not, or Democrats. But you can read a book from either side. Okay, it's just you got to pick a side. You can't be on the fence on this one. Okay, so I have a list of authors that I'm going to put up. All you have to do, guys, is Google conservative authors, liberal authors, okay? And you'll get a ton. Okay, I can put this up on the module if you want, so you can look at it. But I'll discuss some of these authors briefly and tip you off. Now, if you are, say, a very conservative person, you could read somebody you agree with, or you can read somebody that you disagree with. Now, will you have more to write about if you read somebody you disagree with? Probably. Okay. But if you're not real secure in your beliefs, you might want to read somebody you agree with so you can become more knowledgeable of your own beliefs. If you're very knowledgeable of your own beliefs, then maybe you challenge yourself and read somebody opposite. Okay. So let's start here. P.J. O'Rourke, referred to as a satirist. You guys know what satire is, yes? He is funny, a little bit crude with the language. He's kind of a libertarian, but I would consider him conservative, okay? So his books are pretty entertaining to read, all right? He's very witty, smart, witty, funny, okay? So he's got several books out. Dinesh D'Souza. How many of you guys have ever heard of Dinesh D'Souza? No? Okay. He is a documentary filmmaker and a Hollywood filmmaker. He is an Indian immigrant, came to this country from India as a young man. He has authored several books, and his documentaries are among the most ever grossing films that documentaries shown in the movie theater. Okay. So he's got an interesting perspective as an immigrant, very conservative. Okay. Jump down here to Jim DeMint. Jim DeMint's former senator, ran an organization called the Heritage Foundation for a few years. He's written some good books. David Limbaugh, he's the brother to Rush Limbaugh. His books are mostly about the Supreme Court. He's a lawyer. How many of you guys have heard of Rush Limbaugh? Rush Limbaugh? You guys have never heard of Rush Limbaugh? So, you raise your hand. Your parents, your dad, mom, listen to them some? You ever have to sit in the car with them while they're playing it? Yeah. That's how I grew up. 1988. Limbaugh's been on the radio for 30 years. He's on AM from 11 to 2 every day. Okay? He's fighting lung cancer right now. Trump gave him the Congressional Medal, not Congressional Medal, what do they call it? Presidential Medal of Freedom. During his last State of the Union address, actually. He has about 25 million listeners a week. Okay, just to give you some perspective on that, tonight on Fox News, if you're watching Fox News Channel, which is the most watched cable news network, you might get 1.5 million people watching. You're watching CNN tonight at 7 o'clock, prime time, you might get 1 million viewers. So Rush Limbaugh has over 25 million listeners every week. Okay, so he's very influential. Okay, now he doesn't have any books out. He wrote a book back in the 90s, but it's outdated, and you wouldn't know. It's not really outdated as far as worldview, but the names that you would not be familiar with the names of people that he was talking about. Okay. So David Limbaugh, Mark Levin, he's also a radio guy. He's on about 6 o'clock at night, and he's very loud on his radio show. Okay, and he likes to yell at people on his radio show. Shut up, you big dummy. Okay, he says stuff like that. All right. This guy's written probably about 10 New York Times bestsellers. His books are easy to find. His books like Liberty and Tyranny, Meritopia, okay, these types of books. They come from the right. These are very conservative. He is a former Supreme Court clerk and a constitutional expert. Okay, so you're going to get a lot of constitution with Levin. Okay, Laura Ingraham, she's got a radio show and she's a Fox News host, like at 10 o'clock at night. She's written several books. Sarah Palin, you might have heard of her. She has a book. Glenn Beck used to be a Fox News guy. Now he runs Blaze TV. He has several books, easy to find, bestsellers. Some of them I wouldn't recommend. There's one called Common Sense, which is a play on Thomas Paine's Common Sense, but it could almost be like a picture book. So I don't allow that one. Ann Coulter. How many of you guys have ever heard of Ann Coulter? She's one of the top-selling authors in the United States. Okay? She writes political books. She's a tall, skinny blonde. She also clerked for the Supreme Court. And she is not afraid to offend anyone. Her style is blunt. So you might read Ann Coulter's book, and you may agree with Ann Coulter on a lot of what she says, but the way she says it has a lot of shock value. You'll be reading this, and I'm like, I can't believe she said that out loud. Okay, can be very offensive. Okay, shock value. All right, have you heard of Howard Stern? The radio guy, Howard Stern? He's a shock jock. You know what I mean? He says stuff that shocks people, and so that makes people want to listen to him. Okay, it's like that TV show. What's that guy's name that does the where he invites crazy people on his show and they fight and stuff? The Jerry Springer show. It's like shock value. Do people actually behave like this? Is this normal? Okay, she has probably 12 bestsellers. Okay, they're easy to find. I think we have some in our library. Okay, I've read a couple of her books. They tend to be repetitive, which you can write about. Okay, you're going to be critiquing the authors. Okay, so even though you may agree, you're going to be like, this woman, she calls herself a Christian. I don't think so. Okay, Bernie Goldberg. When Mr. Finkeldine taught this class, he had everybody read the same book. And it was a book by Bernie Goldberg. He used to work for CBS News. And he wrote a column once about how everybody at CBS News is biased. They're all liberals. Basically, that's what he said in his article. Well, he soon found himself no longer working for CBS News. And he lost a lot of friends. So he wrote a book on it called Bias. Okay, Mr. Finkeldine had everybody read that. I don't want to read 50 papers on the same book. So I changed it. And I said, I'm going to let you guys choose the book. Okay? But his book Bias is still relevant, although some of the names are from the 90s. Okay? He's written some other books as well. Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, he writes a lot about the Constitution and the founding and the values of this country. David Hortz is a great author. He just passed away. His parents were card-carrying members of the Communist Party, as was he. And then when he got to college, he had an epiphany, and now very staunchly anti-communist. But he writes a lot about the college campus and what professors teach to students from the left. Okay, so he's got an interesting perspective as a former communist. Okay. And he's kind of funny too. All right, so from the left, some liberal authors. Thomas Frank, he has a book, and I've had a lot of students read this for this class. It's called What's the Matter with Kansas? Okay, he's a former Kansan, former Republican, and basically for 200 some pages mocks the stupid people of Kansas for voting Republican, basically telling us that we're voting against our own self-interest by voting for the Republican Party. Okay, so if you read this, hopefully you can see the mockery in it. I've had some students read it, and it kind of went like this over their head a little bit, and I'm like, well, he's actually talking down to you. Okay, so pay attention. Michael Moore, he's a filmmaker as well. He did films like Fahrenheit 9/11. Sicko is another one he did. You can find these on Netflix. But he's also an author. Okay, from the left, he's a big, heavy-set guy from Flint, Michigan. If any of you guys are really into economics, okay, Paul Krugman writes for the New York Times. He's got a book on economics that's kind of a economic Bible for people on the left. You have to be kind of careful with this one. Krugman can be pretty convincing, but if you feel pretty confident in your understanding of economics, I see no reason for you not to read this if you're interested in economics. Okay, and if you have a fairly positive view of capitalism, then you would have no problem refuting some of Krugman's ideas. Okay. A few more from the left. Robert Reich served in the Clinton administration, Secretary of Health and Human Services. Paul Begala was campaign manager for the Clintons. Keith Olbermann's an interesting guy. He used to be a sports center anchor. So he was in the sports world, you know, and he was really good at his job. But he really wanted to get involved in politics. So he got a show. He was on ESPN. Then he got a show on MSNBC. He got fired because he was a little too radical even for MSNBC. So he has his own internet TV show and has written several books. Al Franken's a fun one. Al Franken used to be on the cast of Saturday Night Live. He was a comedian. And then he ran for the Senate in Minnesota and got elected twice. Okay? And then you guys know the Me Too movement, Me Too scandal type stuff. He got caught up in that. He did some things, said some things, took some pictures that could be seen as offensive, belittling the women, and he resigned from office. Okay, he resigned from the Senate. Now, some other people that got caught up in the Me Too movement, they didn't resign. So you got to give the guy some props for that. He wrote a book back in the 90s called Rush Limbaugh's a Big Fat Idiot. Okay. So that's one of his more famous books. Okay. And then James Carville was also with the Clintons. He's a coon-ass from Louisiana. He's funny, has some humor in his writing. When he does interviews, he's got that strong Cajun accent. So he's funny to listen to as well. But he wrote a book like after Obama was elected, like the Democrats will control the United States for the next 40 years. Okay. Well, that didn't happen. But so there's lots out there. There's that bookstore, Bookaholic. Is that what it's called? You can go to the political science section, find a lot of these authors in there. Okay. Coulter and Levin are going to be the easiest books to find because they have, excuse me, they have so many bestsellers. Okay. And some of your parents may have some of these books sitting on the shelf. You just got to look. Okay. I don't read a lot of political books. I like history more, like historical fiction and stuff like that. But all right, so what are you writing? Okay, you are critiquing the author. This is not a book report. I don't want a summary of the book. Okay, that's too easy. I want your opinion. I want you to think about what you're reading. I want you to critique the author. What's this author's background? Why should I even be reading this person's book? What do they bring to the table? Okay, so you might have to research that a little bit. Okay, I told you some biographies on some of them. Okay, page 5 in your book. Okay, page 5 is going to give you, especially if you get stuck. Now, the New York Times has this thing called New York Times Book Review. They actually hire people to read new books and write reviews on them. That's what you're doing. So on some of these books, you can go up and look at other people's reviews of the same book that you're reading. Now, can you plagiarize from that person, put it in your paper? No. Can you quote from a book review that somebody else wrote about this book? Absolutely. You just got to cite that source. Okay? Now, New York Times tends to not to review Ann Coulter's books anymore because they hate Ann Coulter. Okay? But when you go to Amazon and you look at the #1 selling book in America, when Ann Coulter writes a new one, it tends to shoot to the top of the list. But New York Times is like, we're not going to even give her the time of day. Okay? Because they're a biased media outlet. Okay? So some of these you might not be able to find good book reviews. Okay? So what about the author? When was it written? Okay, is it relevant to this election? Is it relevant to what's going on today? Is this a book that a high school student can understand, or was it a lot of it over your head? Did the author do a good job of explaining what they were talking about, giving good background knowledge? Do they cite sources, or is it just like hot air, opinion? You know what I mean? Do they give you like statistics to back up their argument? Some of the authors do, some of them don't. Okay? Who's this targeted at? So, guys, liberals aren't going to read Ann Coulter's book. She's trying to make money. She's trying to sell books. She's giving red meat to conservatives. Okay? So that's who she's targeting, right? Now, some of these may be trying to target people in the middle. You got to read into that, okay? What's their bias? Well, obviously there's going to be bias, so write about it, okay? Do they even give the other opinion a chance? Do they compare two opinions, or do they just share one opinion? You know what I mean? And if they do share both opinions, are they fair to that other opinion? Okay, generally, they're not. You know what I mean? Because they're biased. What's the significance? You know, is this book going to change people's minds? Is it going to bring more people into their thinking, reinforce people's thinking, make people cold and bitter? What's the impact? Okay. So you can lean on this, page 5, if you want to. You don't have to. You don't even have to look at this. Okay. This is more for people that are struggling writing a book review. Now, on the assignment, I gave you a little bit of write-up of kind of things that I'm looking for you to write about on the assignment that's in Canvas. Okay. Good? It gives you like 6 weeks. So you need to find a book. Okay? Now, history, that's sooner for my history students. Okay? So you need to start that one quick before. Okay? Good? Which one of you guys in my history class? Okay, listen. The history papers due right before Thanksgiving, right? Okay? Right before Thanksgiving. Will I be able to grade all of the history papers during Thanksgiving? Well, I just have one class. I'll get close. But, you know, which one's right before Thanksgiving? No, the government's due right before Thanksgiving. Yes. So you guys that have government, okay, if you're a little bit behind, I'll have like 45 government ones to grade, okay? So if you guys need an extension during the break, I can do that, okay? If you can knock it out beforehand, that'd be great, because then I can get them graded, try and get them all graded over the break, okay, which is welcome to our world. You have to come to school on Monday and Tuesday of Thanksgiving week. We used to have to do Reagan Institute, 10 hours of religious training. So we never had the 9 days off, where students have always had the 9 days off. I'm sorry, you guys have 5 days off. And I'll have 5 days to grade those, which won't happen. I'll do my best. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? So start looking for a book, and I'll load this up on the Canvas.
On the test, you said there was 20 matching, right?
20 matching. How many words did you count on the review sheet?
I didn't get a chance to count.
The review sheet's on Canvas, right? Okay. And the notes for history on Canvas now. I put them on there, I just didn't publish them. You have to publish. I got some messages last night, hey, can you put the notes on there? I'm like, they're on there. Did you not see them? Good? Any questions? Good? Hopefully this works. Jeez.